Buongiorno, buonasera, benvenuti amici, welcome my friends. My name is Vincenzo and welcome to my channel, Fountain Pen Therapy. I've been working on this 4-part series for some time now. I just didn't know how to structure it all. I wanted to have some fun doing it and at the same time share it with you in the hope that it be informative and in the hope that I just, give you some of my thoughts. I don't pretend to be an expert. I'm an enthusiast, just like most of you are. Some of you are beginners and maybe are looking to have some idea of what this wonderful world of fountain pens, nibs gives us. And I thought I'd give it a shot. And this is an ongoing project. I remember that when I started as a collector and I purchased my first few pens, I wanted nothing but stub pens. I would order the pen and replace the nibs. And I think I was probably Goulet Pen's favorite customer because I'd order those stubs from Goulet Pens by the dozens, okay? Every single pen I would replace either with a 1.1 or a 1.5. Then I discovered the Stibula stub and I discovered etc, but I stuck to stubs. And it's only in the last couple of years that I've been able to appreciate, frankly, what a fine or a medium or a broad nib can bring to a writing experience. And frankly, so tastes evolve. But I find myself now in a position where I could share some of my thoughts with you, and I thought that I would do this in a 4-part series. And let me introduce to you what the 4 parts are going to look like, and then proceed with part 1. So if you will, I will go back to my screen here and show you what I mean. So here we are on the screen. So part 1, which is this part, we'll look at best standard nibs. And by standard, I mean, the mainstream nibs that we all know of, which is the JOWO, BOCK, or SCHMIDT, 3 German brands. The second subject will be, are number 8 size nibs better than number 6 size nibs? Part 2 will look at the best nibs are gold nibs, followed by titanium and then steel nibs. True or false? B will look at in-house versus standard nibs. Part 3 will look at the most underrated and the most overrated nibs. The best starter nibs. And what about best number 5 nibs? And lastly, part 4 will look at which nibs are the best. German made, Japanese, Chinese, Indian, or Italian. And there may be others, but I've chosen these big 5, so to speak. And also we'll take a look at what I feel are the wettest or the springiest nibs. There you have it. So this is going to be part 1. So folks, without any further ado, part 1 of this comprehensive nib overview presented to you by Vincenzo of Fountain Pen Therapy. Okay, so we're back with the first part of this part 1, which of course will focus on normal standard nibs. I'm not sure those are the correct words, but let me explain. The actors in this first chapter are essentially steel nibs. They are number 6 sized nibs. And they are nibs that come from the three major standard nib manufacturers that we often find in our pens, be it JOWO, BOCK, or SCHMIDT. All German brands. I realize there are others perhaps, but these are the three mainstream nib brands, if you will. And I thought that I do a comparison and at the end of the day give you my conclusions as to where I see these various nibs. Now, the exercise here, and you see the actors, the pen, and we'll deal with the ink in a second. What I'm going to be doing, I have here, first of all, 3 fine nibs from the 3 brands. I have 3 medium-sized nibs, 3 broad. I've got some stubs here. I got some flex, sort of flex, titanium, and 1 gold nib, just to give you a sense of the type of variety that each brand brings to the table. Now, I do not have every single sized nib from each of the manufacturers. It would be astronomical in terms of being able to do that, but I will provide you with a website where you could find them. I think we can safely say that most of us use either fine, medium, or broad, some stubs. We're familiar with some titanium, we're familiar with some gold nibs, and we've got these elastic or flex JOWO nibs that are in the picture as well. So those are the main actors that I will be comparing. Now, what are the inks? Let me show you what the inks are. First of all, I've chosen Waterman Serenity Blue for my fine nibs. I've chosen Konpeki Iroshizuko for my medium nibs, if you will. And for my broad nibs, I have this Scribo Verde Mediterraneo. So that would be my broad. Okay, let me just put those there so I can identify them. As to the rest, I just want to show you the type of variety that exists out there. I won't be doing a comparison. So they have varied inks, which I will identify to the extent that I know which ink are in each of the pens. You could ignore the pens. This is just random. You know, the pens have really got nothing to do with the sampling, if you will. It's the nib that counts. As to the paper that we will be using, I will be using this Sanson Tomo River A5 style paper, which is not as creamy as some of my other Tomo River paper, just because I find that the performance on this paper is just outstanding, so you'll be able to see it. Okay? In other words, the writing sample will not be greatly affected by a coarse or a not a very feathering paper, etc. I wanted to pick a good quality paper to do some of this testing. So there you have it. Now, for me to proceed with detailed writing samples of each pen would take hours. So what I propose that I do is a mixture of the two. I've already done some sampling that I will be able to show you, and I will beef that up, so to speak, with some live writing samples that I can show you, so that I could explain to you, perhaps live, my conclusions on each writing sample for each nib. Okay? So that's the introduction. Let me set things up and we'll be right back. Okay, so why don't we start with the 3 contenders for the fine nib. You'll see the first one is a JOWO Steel number 6 fine. Pretty stiff nib when all is said and done. You can squeeze some variation out of it if you try. It's a fairly wet nib, fairly smooth, I would say. Some very slight, pencil feedback because it is a fine. Most constant. There's really no skipping. And reverse writing, you get maybe an extra fine line, and I gave it 8 on 10 because it was quite substantial in terms of performance. So there you have the JOWO Steel number 6 fine. Now, the next one is the BOCK. Again, very stiff, nice line, very little variation, if you will. A little bit less on the wet side, not as wet as the JOWO. And there was a feedback smooth, okay, a little more feedback than the JOWO nib. It was also very constant. The reverse was very scratchy. I gave it 2 on 10. And there you have my BOCK. Number 3 is the SCHMIDT. Fine. It's semi-stiff. Just got a little bit of a spring, a little bit of variation. It's also very wet. I would say perhaps in between the BOCK and the JOWO, with some feedback. Also very constant. The reverse writing was also very good, and you get an extra fine line, and I gave it about an 8 on 10. And essentially those are the 3. Now if I take the 3 again, and we'll do some live swatching or live sampling here. This is the JOWO, okay, fine nib. So you can see and hear a very quiet, crisp, smooth line is essentially what I'm getting from the JOWO. As to this is the getting a little more feedback. The line is smooth. It's a little, I would say, a little chunkier than the JOWO. Very nice experience. Similar to, I call it like a sailor type feel, if you will. Now we'll look at the SCHMIDT. So I don't know if you hear that, but out of the 3, I think you can safely say that this SCHMIDT nib is probably the noisiest. So you've got quiet, pencil feedback, or sailor feedback, and then you've got a more, I wouldn't say scratchy, but lots of feedback there with the SCHMIDT. And so it depends. If you like a more of a smooth, quiet feel, then you go with the JOWO. If you want a more feedbacky feel, you go with the SCHMIDT, and if you want something in between, I would go with the BOCK. Which one do I prefer of the 3? Well, my favorite of the 3 for the fine would be the BOCK. It gives me a little bit of a thicker line, and I like the in-between line. Actually, that wasn't the BOCK, that was the JOWO. So, sorry about that. And this is the BOCK. So I would give it number 1, and number 2 would be the JOWO. So this is JOWO. And number 1 is my pick for the fine nib. Okay? So that's for the fine. Now, let's look at medium. What have I got for you for medium? Okay. First of all, let me get my pointer so that I can point better without smearing everything. Okay. That's the steel medium nib. You can see it's a fine, nice, juicy line. A little bit of springiness, but softness, but not much. Gets a very little line variation if you really force it. It's fairly wet and pencil smooth. Constant again. Reverse writing gives me an extra fine, and I gave it 8 on 10. It was actually very good. And there you have the medium JOWO. Okay. Next, what do we got? BOCK, fairly stiff, not as thick of a line, if you will. A little bit of line variation, a little bit less than the JOWO. It's fairly wet, and what I would call it chalky smooth, and you'll see that in a second. It's constant. The reverse actually gave me some good performance there. It's an extra fine line, and I gave it an 8 on 10. So there you have my BOCK medium. From the SCHMIDT, I think the SCHMIDT is probably, again, the noisiest of the three, but it's still sailor smooth. It's got a little more spring to it. It's got the most line variation out of the three, I would say to you, but not by much. It's probably the juiciest in terms of wetness. It's a very wet nib. It's constant. It's an extra fine line. A little scratchy. I gave it 6 on 10. So that is my 3 conclusions for my medium. Now, let's do some live handwriting here. Okay, so this is the JOWO. Medium. So you can see a very nice line, very constant, smooth. I'd say to you, a thinner line here, as you can see, but it's got a kind of a chalky base, kind of a singing nib to it, you know, but very smooth. SCHMIDT. There you have it. Much thicker line, much wetter line, a little bit noisier, but sailor smooth. And my winner would be the SCHMIDT. In terms of writing experience, I got to tell you, the SCHMIDT medium nib, for me, is number 1. So there you have the 3. Okay, next. Let me just move this here so we can move my... Okay, next is broad. What have I got for you for broad? Well, okay, so now we're looking at the broad nibs. And first one is these JOWO number 6 steel broad. Nice thick line, pretty stiff. Almost no line variation in my view. It's very wet. It's pencil smooth, it's constant. The reverse writing is actually very nice, extra fine line, 9 out of 10 I've given it to it. So that's the JOWO broad, nice thick line. The BOCK number 6 steel broad line is a little bit broader, I would say to you. A little more line variation, very wet, much thicker than I would say, than the JOWO. It's also pencil smooth, very constant. The reverse is kind of a medium line, and I just sensed a little bit of scratchiness, so I gave it a 7 on 10. So that's for the BOCK broad. Then you have the SCHMIDT broad, which I guess is more akin to the JOWO in terms of line width. It's also very stiff. It's got a little bit more spring, though. I would say a little more line variation than the other two. It's very wet, probably wetter than the rest, although the line is thinner, and it's kind of a chalky line. And I'll explain that in a few seconds. It's kind of constant. The reverse is scratchy. I gave it 2 on 10, so it didn't work out. So there you have the fountain pen therapy conclusion there as well. So there you have it. And in terms of let's do a live sample here. So we will do the JOWO first. Yeah, so I would say to you, kind of pencil smooth. An okay thick line. Not too broad, and not too medium. Yeah, this is a completely smooth sort of an experience. Very quiet. And then we have the SCHMIDT. Yeah, and what I referenced to above, chalky, chalk, I don't know how to spell chalky. So kind of a feedback. What I mean by that is that it almost sounds like your school teacher writing on the board in the classroom. So in terms of line width, I would say to you that the widest is the BOCK, followed by the JOWO and the SCHMIDT. The SCHMIDT gives you kind of a more feedbacky sort of a line writing experience. BOCK gives you a quiet one, and JOWO is somewhere in between. Personally, I like just a little bit of pencil smooth feedback. So my choice here, and also take a look at the JOWO. It just the ink variation in terms of the sheen comes out much nicer in the JOWO. My pick would be this JOWO broad. Is my choice. There you have that. I wanted to show you next is in terms of variation, because what I'm going to demonstrate next is that not all the following nibs are also available in each of the brands, and of course I don't have all of them. Okay, but just so that you get an idea of the type of variety that is offered. For example, let me just cut back here. This is a BOCK stub nib, BOCK that used to be used by Leonardo, and then as you you may know they switched to JOWO because they're having a hard time with BOCK. And that's one of the things that, you know, I will speak to at the end. So this is the BOCK stub. It's quiet. It's more of an italic stub. And in terms of line, it's not a 1.1 and it's not a 1.5. I would say it's about a 1.3 in terms of line. Very nice, but italic. In other words, very, very cut. They're all these nibs are all very wet. So that's the stub that you would get. Now, these stubs, the BOCK stubs, have had some issues. Okay, they, in terms of hard starting and in terms of consistency, it's been a struggle for them. Now, JOWO, this is a 1.1 stub. I would say to you it's more of a cursive, fairly quiet. And as I mentioned, it's a 1.1. So you can see the line, in terms of line variation, it's a little rounder, and it's wet. But it gives you a finer line with some line variation at the same time. That's the advantage of JOWO. I don't believe that BOCK has the different sized stubs. This is the JOWO 1.5 stub. Again, it's cursive, more cursive than italic. It's fairly quiet. And of course it's a 1.5 line, and you can tell that the lines are very, very wet. Okay, so those are the three that you get that I've been able to compare, and you get some interesting results. Now, what's interesting about BOCK that you don't have, and I just want to find it. Where is it? Yeah, it's in here. What's interesting about BOCK is they have titanium nib, which JOWO I don't believe has. And this is the BOCK stub, but titanium. Again, very cursive. So cuts a real thin line, and you can feel and hear. So there is some feedback. It almost cuts into the paper. Okay, and it's I would say it's a 1.1 here. Okay, so there you have the stubs that I have in my collection. In any event, and there again, I would just give the prize, if you will, for Stub Nibs to JOWO. So JOWO, in my view, stubs are preferable over the BOCK. So that's the winner for the Stub Nibs. And again, I don't have them all, and there could be variations. So, you know, one has to take into account what you've got, right? But it gives you an idea of where we stand in terms of the three brands. Now, what else have I got for you? Well, I got some more specialized nibs that I want to show you from each of the brands. And that kind of plays into the type of variety that each nib offers, which you know, the more variety, then they're you know, they've got to jump on the other, right? So what do we got here? Well, first thing I want to show you some of those elastic nibs that JOWO has come up with. What I mean by that is, I mean, some refer to them as flex. What you see is there's a cutout. Sorry about the focusing. There, you see the cutout on the side, so it gives it a little more elasticity. Now this is a JOWO. It's on a Delta pen, and this is the extra fine. So this is JOWO. Now, in terms of flex, there's not much there. I would say to you that this goes from an extra fine, North American extra fine, to maximum a medium, okay? Because there's not much flex there, but there is some softness. And it makes it, I think this gives it, at the end of the day, a nice fine line. And I would prefer this nib over the fine. Let me just get the fine. This is the fine, the JOWO fine. So those of you who prefer a finer line would go with the normal nib. But if you want a juicier fine line, but not quite medium, with some spring to it, then you would take this extra fine flex or elastic nib from JOWO. They also have a fine version of that elastic nib. Okay, and this one writes the following. Very nice. And it's got that nice sailor feedback. Okay, this, what I would say to you, goes from almost a fine medium, and you can get a broad out of this. Okay, so again, if you have to compare the medium, this is the JOWO medium. If you want a smooth medium with no feedback, you go with the normal medium nib. But if you want a little more of a fun writing experience and want a medium line, I would go with that fine elastic, because it does give you that line. It gives you a little more line variation, and therefore makes the handwriting experience all that much better. So there you have. So those are the writing samples. Now what I want to show you next is a website that I strongly recommend, because it gives you a good idea of where you can get nibs, and at the same time all the variety that exists. Now let me just go to my computer here. Here we go. It's one of my favorite sites. It's FP Nibs. So you go down in the, if you go down, I'm sure a lot of you know, but for at least the newbies, look at all the nibs they've got here. So if you take a look at BOCK, you can go to BOCK. They have like titanium, they have gold, they have steel, they have platinum, they have palladium. If you go down to JOWO, they've got number 5, number 6, number 8 nibs. Okay. And in BOCK has number 5. They have number 6. They have number 8. So there's all kinds of varieties. Okay. I would say to you that at the end, when everything is said and done, probably BOCK has the most variety in terms of different types of nibs. JOWO probably comes second. Okay, so if you talk about variety, I would give it to the nod to BOCK. Okay, but if you talk about consistency and all the rest of it, there's a particular reason why JOWO nibs are being used by many pen brands as opposed to BOCK. BOCK appeared to be a little more popular several years ago, but these days I think JOWO has taken advantage. You see the SCHMIDT nib now more and more in Chinese pens. Bennu swears by it. And then, of course, the JOWO nib, over time, I think, has been a little more consistent than BOCK. And, you know, some people prefer BOCK and some people prefer JOWO. So there's no cut and dry. I think the SCHMIDT nibs, in terms of pricing, I would say the SCHMIDT nibs are the most affordable. They're a lot of fun. That's what I find about SCHMIDT. BOCK and JOWO are pretty boring. They're kind of standard. They give you a nice line, but the writing experience is not as tactile as SCHMIDT. So if you like a tactile writing experience and not overly expensive, try out those SCHMIDT nibs. Really, and you know, you got a.MOST that uses the SCHMIDT nib now. You've got SCHMIDT nib in Bennu. Beautiful nibs. You got SCHMIDT nibs that are being used in the Visconti. So, you know, they're a lot of fun, those SCHMIDT nibs. But if you wanted just a very constant and reliable nib, it would be JOWO. BOCK comes second, but they've had their issues. I personally prefer JOWO. My conclusion is that JOWO are probably the most expensive of the lot. If you want variety, you can get titanium, you can get all kinds of materials, sizes. BOCK has got the edge there. But in terms of consistency and reliability, I think JOWO takes the nod, especially if you want the stub nibs. If you want the stub nibs, SCHMIDT doesn't have stub nibs when all is said and done. So I would go with JOWO. However, let me just show you something else. What's fun about BOCK, in my view, let me just cut, is these titanium nibs. This is a titanium broth, so smooth, you can't hear it, and really wet. Just a very nice writing experience. So you want to go a little bit step up. That's the advantage of BOCK. If you want titanium nibs, you got to go to BOCK. And of course, that's not to mention the fact that, and I'm not there yet because we will do a whole chapter on number 8 size nibs. But look at this beautiful number 8 size titanium BOCK nib. I mean, you know, this is a number 8 size. That is really nice. Okay, so they've got that advantage. Now, terms of gold nibs, I've got just one JOWO gold nib. This is a Would I spend money on a JOWO gold nib? Absolutely not. I'm sorry, folks, but I have a hard time feeling the difference between this gold JOWO and a steel nib. I just wouldn't spend the money for a JOWO gold nib. I really wouldn't. If we're talking about Pilot, Sailor, the Italian pens that we'll be reviewing, or that I've reviewed in the Flex series, you're talking Montblanc. Now you're talking Santini. You're talking real gold, performing soft nibs. But a JOWO soft nib gold, nah, it's stiff. It's not soft enough, in my view, to warrant the price. And check out FP Nibs. They give you prices, and you'll see. Not sure it's worth $150, $200 for a JOWO gold nib. Is it worth buying that BOCK titanium? That could be a good alternative. I've got to tell you, very impressed by those titanium nibs. And I don't believe that JOWO has titanium, although I heard rumors that they may come out with some. But there you have it. So normal standard steel, I would go with JOWO. If you want tactile, I take SCHMIDT over BOCK. If you want consistency and reliability, it's JOWO. In terms of variety, materials, shapes, I would go with BOCK. And in terms of specialized, I wouldn't go with the gold JOWO. I prefer the BOCK titanium. So there you have it. Is there one winner from all of these? Not really. It all depends on those factors that I've mentioned. But if I have to order a pen and I'm given a choice, for example, Ranga gives you a choice. It gives you BOCK, it gives you JOWO and others. I always go with the JOWO. And my favorite these days is the JOWO broad nib. If I have to go for a fine or even a medium, I prefer a gold nib, because the gold nib would give me that writing experience with that fine line. If I have to have a thicker line, I would go with the steel nib, and I would go with a broad, and JOWO would be my top choice. Now, look, I've got a Pelican broad nib, 18 karat, but it's $1,000. Okay, so, and stay tuned. We'll take a look at the gold nibs and whether or not they're worth it, and the whole debate over steel, gold over steel, over titanium, etc., etc. We have one special chapter or episode on that particular question. So there you have it. That's the first part of this episode, normal standard nibs. What's next? Well, the next question is, are number 8 nibs better than number 6 nibs? Well, stay tuned. Okay, so the next subject, or the next question is, what's best, number 8 or number 6 size? You can even add, what about number 5? Okay, but we'll take a look at number 5 perhaps separately. There's bigger is better, right? Yes and no. It's a controversial, and I guess there's no real answer, but I can give you my point of view. If I can get my hands on a number 8 size nib, I'll go for the number 8. I just can't explain why, but I'm going to, in terms of real precise and scientific answer, I look for the writing experience, just the fact that I'm writing with a bigger nib, it just gives me all that more fountain pen therapy. That's for me. In terms of actual writing performance, there may not be a big difference, and some would argue that there isn't. A nice pilot 14 karat nib or a sailor that kind of mimics a number 6, or even just some of the Peniter as beautiful nib, Stipula. You got the Italians, then you've got the German nibs. Number 6 gives you great performance, and arguably you can't really say that the number 8 gives you a better performance than the number 6, but it's the writing experience that takes you to a different level. Now let me try to perhaps demonstrate that by actually taking a look at my stars, if you will. Who's starring in this chapter of the film? Well, let's cut. Okay. I've got here a series of Chinese pens, because the beauty with these Chinese pens is that they've made number 8 size nibs totally affordable and can give you a good indication of how you feel, because there is a difference. There is a difference. So we've got the Jinhaos here, extra fine, medium. I've got the Winsung, fine and medium, and then I've got 2 samples of the Ongdian number 8 size. I've got the Majon number 8. Here I have the Magna Carta, and then I have a big number 8 size BOCK. I have a number 8 size Mayora titanium nib. I have my Montblanc 149, my Pelican M1000, and my Grail pen, ultimate Grail pen, my Dolce Vita oversize original, okay, with a number 8 size nib. So those are the actors, if you will. Same paper. I haven't paid great attention to the ink, because I'm not really doing a comparison here. So the inks may vary depending on the pen, and it in my view doesn't make a big difference. Okay, not in terms of our discussion. So those are the actors. Now let's take out our notebook and let's see, and I'll try to demonstrate to you what I think you should look at, especially again the newbies to our hobby, and why number 8. Well, first thing, and I'm just going to close up here so you can appreciate things even more. First thing you have to notice about a number 8 sized nib is that usually, because of the sheer size of that nib, the nib section has a tendency to be much girthier. Now, this one is maybe the wrong example, because this is a very girthy section, the Jinhao 9019, but let me give you an example of a sought after number 8 size nib, which is this Montblanc. As you can see, the girth of the section in this pen is comparable, maybe slightly thinner than the Jinhao, but it's much thicker than a normal number 6 size. And what pen can I use? 1 second. Let me just, let me take this number 6 sized pen, which is a big pen. As you could see, the girth of the section is necessarily bigger because the nib is bigger. Okay, and some people would argue that the comfort level is just not there with a number 8 size nib. So this is the Montblanc. Now I have big hands, so in my view, it may not affect me. Okay, as much as it would affect somebody with smaller hands. In fact, even with bigger hands, I have a tendency not to go down here, but to keep it up a little more up and get another kind of a, get more flow to my pen by keeping it higher up as opposed to lower down, if you will. Why? Because I'm searching for that comfort. It's not natural for there to be such a girth on the pen, whereas compared to this number 6 size, the comfort level is just natural here. You know, I can go very long writing session with this pen, which, by the way, is a bigger pen than most number 6s, okay? But still much more comfortable than my Mont Blanc, which I've got a feeling I've never had to write, you know, long sessions with my Mont Blanc. On the other hand, take a look at this Mayora titanium nib, which doesn't have a very girthy section. It does have that flare to accommodate the big size nib, okay? But it's quite hourglass shaped. Whoops, I'm putting it in the wrong. So if you're looking for perhaps a more comfortable, I'm a little bit too close here. Okay, yeah. Then this Mayora is a much more comfortable. I haven't written with this pen in a while, but much more comfortable shape there. So, but you can take a look at the Wing Sung, and there again, you know, big size. The girth is very big. And some would argue that that girth is just not comfortable enough for them. And that girth actually goes right down the line, except, let's take a couple of pens where I showed you that titanium nib. This is my M1000, and this is where I think this pen excels over the Mont Blanc. Take a look at the girth. It's just a little bit thinner. And also the section of that nib, kind of a little more tapered at the bottom, and then kind of flares up. So you get the beauty of the big nib, but you get the section that doesn't compromise, doesn't affect, you know, your comfort. This, to me, in my collection, is probably the most comfortable pen that I have. I can go on for hours writing with this pen. And, you know, it's got a smaller section. So I guess if you're going to go for that number 8 size nib, the other one that I would recommend, if you want this big size, is take a look at this flare. This is the Andean, okay? I prefer the chrome over the black. I find the black doesn't write as nicely as, now I haven't written it with this pen in a while, but yeah, and the unfortunate thing about Andean is that it only comes in this kind of fine nib. But there you have a very thin section on this pen. The other more recent version here, this is a fine. So you get the you know, that big nib, but a finer section. So the Andean gives you a nicer What about the Mahjong? The Mahjong, you see, very thick, very, very big. So that wouldn't give you, I haven't written with this in a while. That would not give you the same comfort. The Magna Carta, you know what? Maybe not as thick as the Mont Blanc. And the nib's much bigger. There you go. Probably rivals more my Pelican. Haven't written with this in a while. There we go. Just a beautiful nib for a steel. Number 8 size nib. Recommended. Very, very, very nice. So that's a little bit thinner. Does the Mahjong flat version? Yeah, you know what? The section is just comparable. Maybe just a little bit thinner, but comparable. But a little more comfortable. And you know what? Just a little bit less makes it, you know, all that more enjoyable in terms of comfort. Then, of course, I have my huge Ranga pen. It does have a flare, but, you know, in terms of girth, it's there. But it gives you that little flare, so that just that little section, because of the flare, will provide, in my view, a lot more comfort. Yeah, much better. So there you have it. So that's the first point I'd like to make. Number 8 size nib, in terms of comfort, may not be for everybody. It might just if you don't have even bigger hands, and I don't have huge hands, but I have bigger hands, you know, that thick writing section can start to be, you can start to feel some cramping in your fingers if you're dealing with a long writing session. And the way I release that is by holding the pen a little bit higher up to kind of give it a little more smooth effect, as opposed to crunching my hands way down, and then the hands have a tendency to cramp up on me. So that's the comfort. Now, what's the attraction of a number 8 size nib? Well, let's look at something. I mean, this is the Mont Blanc, okay? It is just an absolutely gorgeous instrument. Now, another thing that you need to keep in mind, let me just switch pages here, which again affects the writing experience in my view, is that you're further away from the paper, okay? When you compare it to a number 6 size nib, you can see that there is a difference, okay? And that difference might affect your writing experience, in the sense that, you know, I'm closer to the paper here, and I have complete control over the writing experience. Whereas when I'm a little further away, I have to kind of find that sweet spot in terms of writing experience. It's as if because I'm further away from the paper, I have a tendency not to have that similar control of my handwriting. It's more compact and constant, and I guess it's a compact feel, you know. Whereas when it's higher up, it's like being higher up. You're like being on a ladder. You're not as stable. I guess that's the only way that I could describe it. And let me just give you another example. This is the wing song. I'm further away from the paper, so I don't have that compact writing feel that I have when I'm writing with a number 6. This is Penlux. I'm there. The paper is there. So that to me is another factor that you may want to consider, and not blow too much money over a number 8 size nib. And that's where those Chinese pens come in. I think they're fabulous because it does give you a chance to experiment with a bigger sized nib at a price that's, a fraction of what I'm paying for my Mont Blanc. I mean, I paid this, or my wife paid this, $1,200. I can get my Jinhao 9019 for $20. And it gives me a very, very similar writing experience. And I invite you to take a look at my one of my videos where I do an actual comparison. I mean, this 9019, okay, this is the fine nib. I mean, have no illusions. It is a beautiful pen. Or I should say a beautiful nib. I haven't written with this thing in months. There's a little bit of skipping there, but that's because it's dried out a little bit and I've hardly got any ink in there. But take a look at that nib. I mean, it's a beautiful, big size nib. And that's, I guess, the attraction. That's the attraction. Now, the biggest and the nicest number 8 size nib, what would I go for? It's this Pelican. This Pelican, I mean, just looking at that nib gives you the feeling that you're going to be riding high, I think it's just absolutely, absolutely gorgeous. Now, one thing I noticed. Okay, no. Yeah, it's I thought I saw 14, but it is an 18 karat. I mean, wow. Just beautiful, just beautiful. Yeah, so those are the pens that I've, and this this titanium nib is also something that I will look into, kind of an in-between solution. So it's not gold. And it kind of gives you that springy sensation of some of the gold number 8s. But that's a different subject. Okay, now we're getting into gold versus steel versus titanium, which is a completely different animal. But I thought that I share with you, the difference between number 8 and number 6, and what's for some and what's not for others. The last thing, and I guess I touched on it a little bit, is that when you, and let me go back to my notebook or notepad, when you have a bigger nib, there is a tendency for it to be a little bit springier just because of the sheer length. And it's not a general rule, but it does provide a little more spring to the writing, softer, even with this number 6 size, although some would argue that the JOWO nib, okay, is pretty stiff. Okay, no, this is the extra fine that I didn't ink. Where's my medium? Here it is. You know, this JOWO, yeah, even then, it's got a little bit of springy softness to it. So, you know, you don't get that you don't get that springiness in a number 6 size JOWO JOWO nib, whereas you get it in the number 8, you know. And that's, I guess, the other fun part about, you know, about the number 8 size. And even this Ongdian gives you a little bit of springiness, okay. Even the Mahjong gives you a little bit of springiness. You know, it's bigger, so naturally it does provide. And let me just 1 second. Yeah, I just wanted to prime this this Mahjong. Yeah, very springy. So we're talking girth. First of all, looks. Okay, the nibs look so much nicer, and the writing experience looks nicer. Girth enters the picture, so you've got to be careful. The fact that you're further away from the paper might affect the stability or the compactness of your handwriting. And lastly, it just because it's bigger, it often is softer or has that little bit of spring, which makes the writing experience all that much desirable, if you will, and enjoyable. That's my take on it. Now, what's my best number 8 size nib? The Pelican. Beautiful. You know, and this is kind of broad. I'm thinking about getting other M1000s, or at least a nib, in fine and in medium, and just experiment with them, just because I think they're probably my best writer. Unless I get into flex nibs. If we get into flex nibs, now we're getting into a completely different animal, and I invite you to take a look at my video on flex nibs. You'll be able to get a full picture of what I've been able to discern patterns in several different types of flex nibs. So there you have it, folks. That's chapter 1. I hope that was enjoyable. We're going to do chapter 2 next week, or part 2 next week, with 2 chapters again. We'll deal with 2 other items that I spoke about originally in my introduction. Thank you very much for joining me. Grazie molto. Thank you. Please subscribe. If you find this interesting, let me know. Or should I stop right here and forget about part 2, part 3, part 4? If, on the other hand, you've enjoyed this, please let me know. So it kind of gives me an idea of what to avoid and what to do and what to expect for my upcoming part 2, 3, and 4. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye now.